let us get a historical perspective to the Ministry of Interior. Something just for your edification, if you like. So when I attended the ministry to discuss the interview, I noticed on the walls of the entrance to the ministry, famous names that had been ministers of Interior before the Honorable Adom-Otchere. So by the kind courtesy of the ministry's public relations department, here are the photographs. Slow them down a bit so we can go through them. We slow them down a bit. Let's start again. Let's start again so we can go. So that's Mr. Adom-Otchere. He was the first minister. You can see the dates there, March 1957, and so that's around independence. Next to him is Mr. Adom-Otchere, who was there in November 57 onwards. Next after that was Mr. A.E. Nkumsa. Now these are the famous names who had been ministers of Interior before this time. Mr. Nkumsa was there as well. And then the next one is Mr. Abavana. Do you remember that name? Those of you who are a bit older, you remember L.R. Abavana, one of the famous old politicians. And then after Mr. Abavana, there was Mr. Kweku Boateng. Of course, Mr. Kweku Boateng is the father of Paul Boateng, the politician in Britain who became the Deputy Chancellor of the Exchequer under Tony Blair. Mr. Paul Boateng has continuously maintained his relationship with Ghana. That's his father, the Reverend Kweku Boateng, who was in politics all up until 1992, actually. He was a member of Kensen Akar's party in the 1992 era. Those of you who don't know, perhaps you're hearing for the first time. So forgive me because the photographs are not that clear. We hurriedly put it together. Just for your edification, I believe that is Deku. Mr. KK Deku is the next. I believe this is Mr. Harley. Yeah, so that was Deku, correct? This is Mr. Harley, and you know who they are. They were important members of the NLC. S.D. Dombo, who is today said to be one of the traditional pillars of the MPP. So these days they talk about the Dankwa Buzia Dombo tradition. That's Mr. S.B. Dombo. It should be clearer, please. Next after him is Mr. N.Y.B. Adade, one of the finest jurists of all time in Ghana. He became a Supreme Court judge, a very, very distinguished lawyer. Mr. N.Y.B. Adade of the Dankwa Buzia stock was also at the Ministry of Interior. Next after Mr. Adade is Mr. J.H. Kobina. Mr. Kobina would have been there during the era of the coup. He's a senior police officer. Next after Mr. Kobina was Mr. Ernest Aku. He also, from the photograph, shows as a police officer. And next after Mr. Ernest Aku, there was another police officer, Mr. B.S.K. Kwachi, was there in 1978 up until June 1979. Is that what I'm seeing? Yes. B.S.K. Kwachi. After B.S.K. Kwachi, and we're going through the historical ministers of Interior, Mr. Ben Fojo was there in 1979, June to August. This was during the AFRC era. He must have been very close to the revolutionaries as a civilian to be the Minister for the Interior. Next is Mr. W.G.E. Echo Daniels. He was also there during the Liman era, 79 to 1981. Echo Daniels, he was one of probably the dons at the university, something like that. Next after him, well, sorry, that's cloudy. I don't know whether we can do something about that so we can see it clearly. Jantua, KSP Jantua, whose children are active participants in politics these days. He was the Minister for the Interior. And of course, Mr. Johnny Hansen, the famous Johnny Hansen, he was with the revolutionaries and he's quite well known. Johnny Hansen was there as well. Next after him is Mr. J.M. Ewa, Colonel J.M. Ewa, I should say. And then there's Mr. Kofi Jin, who was also well known as an advocate of the PNDC philosophy. Kofi Jin, right there as Minister of Interior. Next after Kofi Jin taking office in 1985, the very handsome general, Major General W.M. Manson Wood, who was quite well known. He died tragically during the PNDC era. And next after him, it was the Member of Parliament for Dodo, that is Ni Okaija Adamafio, a very famous one because he was a very, very strong Interior Minister. Nana Kwaku Sapon had also been there under the PNDC era. And Colonel E.M. Oseiusu was also there under the PNDC era. Of course, Alhaji Mahama Idrisu is still happily with us. He's in politics, and we know that he was also there as a Minister for the Interior, historically. Let's go on. I think there's another set of ministers that we'll look at just before we go to look at the questions that we have prepared for Mr. Adom-Otchere. Of course, the walls has President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo there. This is at the office of the Ministry of Interior, the coat of arms. We filmed all that. Okay, so there you go. This is Alhaji Yakubu, who was the Minister of Interior, the first one under the Kufuor administration. Unfortunately, he had to resign. Next after him is Dr. Kwame Addo-Kufuor, who probably took over when he resigned. There's Hackman Usu-Agyemang, who you can see recently made chairman of Cocoa Board. Papa Usu-Ankuma was also there. He now is heading to London as the High Commission, Ghana's High Commission to the United Kingdom, Papa Usu-Ankuma. Next is Mr. Albert Kandapah, who is now the Minister for National Security, still within the security context, Mr. Kandapah. And that's the baby face, the Honorable Kwame Bartels. He was also there, and that ended the Kufuor era. Professor Mills began with Mr. Cletus Avoka, clearly seen there in your shot. Next to Cletus Avoka is the citizen vigilante, Martin Amidu. On the left side of your screen is Martin Amidu, the citizen vigilante. And next is a gentleman, very good lawyer as well, Mr. Ben Kumbo, who is also a law teacher. And next after him is Mr. William Aboa. Mr. William Aboa, I believe, was at the Mahama era. And there was also Kwesi Ahoy, who later became the ambassador in South Africa. And finally, well, before Mark Woyongo, and then Prosper Bani. Tonight, we will have Mr. Ambrose Derry, MP, who is the current Minister of Interior. He's been in office for just 3 months, but of course, this is not the first time Ambrose Derry is serving in government. He had been at the Attorney General's office before. He has a long legal practice of successful legal advocacy behind him. We'll be asking him a few questions tonight, and one of them is, perhaps you've also received a text message that says that your phone is being tapped, something like that. Later on, that's the Honorable Ambrose Derry. This photograph taken from his vetting recently, where he was said to have performed excellently before the appointment committee. Ambrose Derry will join us in the studio pretty shortly. There he is again. Well, now showing his party colors. Mr. Ambrose Derry is a member of parliament for the NPP for the Nandom constituency.